name is Priya Marwa, and I'm also working with Christine in the Adolescent Development and Participation section in UNICEF headquarters. My focus is on adolescents in humanitarian and peace building situations, and I also oversee the overall Adolescent Kit initiative, in which all of us are working quite closely: Christine, Juliet, myself, and Erica, who's online right now. We're so excited to have Juliet take us through a deep dive of the Adolescent Kit in its original form and the adapted resource package that we have developed for lockdown and quarantine situations such as COVID-19. And we're really excited that we have such a diverse group joining us today, including external partners. I'll just speak to this slide, the next slide, please. I'll just speak to the slide that you will soon see in front of you, which is a little bit of a background on the Adolescent Kit. The kit, as we usually call it in its original or short form, is a set of tools, activities, and supplies based on human-centered design to implement with adolescents, especially in crisis situations. That's the way the kit was designed, and it's gone through years of testing, working and getting activities which were preferred by adolescents themselves in various situations. The activities have offered adolescents the chance to express themselves, experiment, solve real problems, and explore new ideas. In the process, of course, adolescent girls and boys have developed key competencies that have helped them to cope and cope with stressful situations, build healthy relationships, learn new skills, and engage positively with each other and their communities. And in the next few slides from Juliet, you will see how we've been managing to do that. The Adolescent Kit draws from best practice in psychosocial support, life skills education, child protection, and peace building. So a lot of our colleagues who are working on education programs or child protection programs, mental health, psychosocial support, peace building programs end up using or integrating the kit within their overall programs. And currently, as you see in the slide, we have some 16 UNICEF country offices using and implementing the Adolescent Kit. We've managed to reach 160,000 adolescents in the last years, but we're really hoping to expand its use to many more countries, especially during such times, and to reach many, many more adolescents. You may find some of the next slides presented by Juliet repetitive, especially for those of you who joined the launch webinar on 3 June. But we hope that you will find this repetition useful. It's important to go over all of the key concepts again, especially as we're recording this session, and for those of you who are new today to the session. And we really hope that the key concepts are something you continue to use as you look and explore how to best utilize the Adolescent Kit in your particular setting. So without further delay, I pass on to Juliet, our trainer on the Adolescent Kit, who many of you know and who will take you through this session till the end. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much, Christine and Priya, for those introductions and for getting us started. And so now I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about what we'll talk about through this tutorial and just run you through the agenda for this morning. So first, we just, as background, wanted to say a little bit more about the quote-unquote original Adolescent Kit for Expression and Innovation, bearing in mind that that's really the foundation of the adapted package that we're going to present to you. And then we will move into talking about what this adapted resource package is and what its purpose was, why we developed it in addition to the Adolescent Kit, the original version, which is already there for adaptation and generally is used with a lot of adaptations. At the third step, I'll walk you through a couple of the sample activities to sort of see how those would be different and what those might look and feel like from the point of view of an adolescent participating in a program that is supported with these materials. And then I'll walk you through a little bit more of the resource package itself. So we'll telescope in step 3 and then telescope back out in step 4. For step 5, just to talk a little bit about some planning and implementation steps that are specific to using this resource package. And those are mostly drawn from our country office colleagues who have been both innovating this package with us and for us, as well, for all of us, as well as learning some lessons and testing out the resources that we've developed. And then finally, I'll talk about some questions that we've been asked online in the last webinars through direct emails. As well, we'll just talk about some of the questions that you may raise again in that Q&A box that Christine mentioned before. So, so that's our agenda for now. Next slide, please. Great. So first, again, I hope that many of you who are on this webinar may already have some familiarity with the Adolescent Kit for Expression and Innovation. Which is, and if not, that's fine too. I wanted to anchor this conversation about the adapted package first in understanding what the original package of the Adolescent Kit for Expression and Innovation is. So maybe next slide, Erica, thanks. Thank you. Okay, so UNICEF has developed, the Adolescent Development and Participation section developed this sort of large kit of resources to support country offices and partners and adolescents around the world in either building new programs to support adolescents' engagement, psychosocial well-being, learning of skills, and action in their communities. And it also is there to strengthen programs you may already have in place and adjust them and build in some new opportunities. So the general purpose of this Adolescent Kit is to bring young people together physically in person, when that's possible, in adolescent circles where they have an opportunity to experiment, solve problems, cope with stressful situations, and again, take some action in their community. And in developing, I was involved in developing the Adolescent Kit. We used a human-centered design approach, integrating and linking with best practices and principles in mental health and psychosocial support, in life skills, in social cohesion, and in peace building, as well as adolescent and youth engagement. So we work to make the kit a sort of comprehensive and holistic and genuinely cross-sectoral program, set of program resources. Next slide. For anyone interested in learning more about the Adolescent Kit, the original version, as well as the kit adapted package that we're developing and presenting here, a first thing to understand is that the entire kit is designed to support adolescents in developing these 10 broad competencies that you see on the left slide. So that's the whole purpose of the Adolescent Kit. When we talk about it being an adolescent kit for psychosocial support, as you can see, these competencies are psychosocial well-being competencies, right? Abilities to communicate and express. Positive feelings of identity and self-esteem are inherently part of adolescent psychosocial well-being. And they're also broadly life skills, and they're also relevant for goals for social cohesion. They're also skills that enable and support adolescents' positive and active engagement. So these competency domains are really, in a way, they're the kind of program objectives of the Adolescent Kit. So whenever you're thinking about what the kit is for, it's for these competencies. And then on the right, you see this idea of 10 key approaches. The whole kit is designed with this understanding that there are 10 key approaches that relate to our human rights agenda, that relate to best practices in child participation, in peace building, in learning, and that all of the programs, everyone working on a program with and for adolescents should be using these 10 key approaches. So these are kind of at the core of the Adolescent Kit resources. Next slide. The kit itself is a set of program guidance, resources, and tools. I should emphasize that it's not a program in a box. So there's no such thing as the Adolescent Kit program. It is a set of tools and building blocks that you can use to either build your own program and or to strengthen a program that you have in place. And you may very well want to use it together with other resources through a program that exists, together with resources, learning materials, activities, program structures, partners that are relevant for your context at the country level. And the kit includes these guidance resources. So this center, there's this foundational guidance, which by the way outlines the 10 key competencies and the 10 key approaches. And that's for everyone working with adolescents, so that there's a kind of shared set of goals. So the program managers and the facilitators, that foundation guidance is for everyone. And then on the left, there's a program coordinator's guide. And that is really more for, we use this term program coordinator, but I'm guessing that's most of you on this call. That is all of you who are in a management, a design, an oversight role. So if you're a program officer or specialist in UNICEF, or if you're a manager, officer, et cetera, specialist in a partner organization, this is probably you on the program coordinator side. And then facilitators are the people working directly with adolescents, which may include a lot of people from various, from partner organizations and from NGOs. It may also include youth volunteers. And just to mention also, there is this quick guide, this small guide that's available that just sort of runs through an outline of all of the resources in this big package. These are all available on the Adolescent Kit website, which I'll show you in a minute. Next slide, please. And then there is a large box of activities to support adolescents, again, learning psychosocial well-being and action. And so I just wanted to mention that those are all there. And a big part of what you'll see that we worked on in this adapted package is adapting the activity, a few of the activity guides themselves for use in this different COVID context that requires us to work differently than the way we would and do, and we hope will work again when we can bring adolescents together in groups in person. Next slide. And just to mention also that the idea of this adolescent, part of the idea of the toolkit is that it's a set of building blocks that you and adolescents will use to create a program that works for you. So instead of creating like a curriculum or an activity manual, we wanted to create a process that's more sustainable and more adaptable for you to create a program for adolescents that's relevant for the adolescents, their interests, their needs, their age level, their context, their phase in the humanitarian cycle. So the activities are built around 4 phases. And I also want to mention these because this is relevant to the adapted activities for COVID that we'll talk about in a minute. So the first one is bringing adolescents together in a group and giving, we just call this starting our circle. So giving adolescents who are newly working together a chance to get to know each other, feel comfortable learning together, feel some connection with each other so that they can be ready for with some trust, with some connection for the learning that comes next. And then the next phase is knowing ourselves. So these are still pretty simple activities that adolescents can work on while together in a group, but mostly sort of getting to know themselves, thinking about their own identity, recognizing their own strengths, learning some terms to describe and identify and recognize and validate their own feelings. And then at the third phase, we think about adolescents connecting. And that means connecting with each other in the group and developing those communication, problem solving, teamwork, cooperation skills that people need to work together. Also just making friends, developing peer relationships and networks that we know are essential for their well-being. And also connecting with the world around them, beginning to explore, do some community interviews, hopefully doing some activities that strengthen their relationships across generations, and maybe if they're in crisis situations, contribute to some kind of like stability and community cohesion. And finally, taking action, which is, I'm sure, a familiar concept and something that many of you are working on with adolescents, that they are working on identifying issues in their own lives and communities that are important to them and deciding how they want to work together to take action. Next slide, please. Just to mention that this, the Adolescent Kit comes with a supply kit and that is for anyone working in humanitarian or low resource contexts that may need certain supplies to support adolescents in working together. That's it's UNICEF's newest supply kit to support education and psychosocial support in emergencies. And I won't say too much more about the design, but I did want you to know that it's there. And if you want to learn more about it, I recommend looking at the website and some of the resources in the website that can tell you more about that. Next slide, please. This is a little bit more to show you that in the adolescent kit, supply kit, there are hard copies of some of the materials that I just showed you. So, but also all of those materials are available on the adolescent kit website openly to anyone. So they're not they're published by UNICEF, but they are open to anyone to use, to download, to print as you see fit. Next slide. And then one important thing that does relate to the COVID package is that even in this original adolescent kit, all of the stationery and supplies that we include in the adolescent kit supply kit are simple, inexpensive, easily replaceable. These are the kinds of materials that can help adolescents who might be working in a group together, but there's nothing fancy or expensive. And most of the activities, if not all of the activities in the adolescent kit, can be done with supplies that you could procure at the country level in most situations, unless you're truly in a humanitarian crisis where there just are not supplies available, because we wanted to have as little dependency on the supply kit as possible. Next slide. So again, you can learn more about the original adolescent kit on this website. And I hope that if this is of interest to you, you'll do so. And there are also all kinds of resources to explain more, webinars, tutorials, as well as a frequently asked questions site. And as well, you can reach out to Priya, to Christine, and to myself if you did want to learn more about this resource. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to show you a couple of images of what it looks like, what some of the programs that I believe, Priya and Christine, I believe that the adolescent kit is now in use in 30 countries, is that right? Or has been used in 30 countries? And I know we were up to 22 pretty recently. And it's used in all different kinds of programs and all different kinds of contexts. So here's just a few examples of what it's looked like in Nigeria, in the program that UNICEF Nigeria has developed using the adolescent kit. Next slide, please. Here's a couple of quick pictures of South Sudan, which is one of the countries that innovated the kit with us starting way back in 2013 and continues to use the kit as a key resource in its programs for life skills and psychosocial support. Next slide. And also UNICEF Colombia, so you can see different continents, different cultural contexts, has been using and adapting the adolescent kit resources through their programs. So you can see, and I do want you to see, you can see that a key element of using the original version of the kit is bringing adolescents together in person and giving them that opportunity for fun, for learning. And I should also highlight that at the heart of the kit also are arts-based approaches to all of these psychosocial support, action, and learning activities. So you'll see a lot of arts-based activities in the original version and in the adapted version that we're about to talk about. Next slide. Okay, so I took that time to talk to you about the original adolescent kit because I do want to emphasize that this is not what we're about to present for COVID response. It's not necessarily a new kit. It's an adaptation from that larger package that I just showed you. So, so what this new adapted resource package for COVID-19 is, it's a resource package that we adapted a few key activities as well as some other guidance from the original version of the adolescents kit so that we could think about how we could support country offices in developing programs for adolescents who are living through this crisis right now. The target of the resource package, just as the target of the original adolescent kit, is for adolescents ages 10 to 19. So most of the resource package is activities directed towards that age group, as well as some guidance for facilitators, for program coordinators, and a kind of new element, which is some more guidance directed specifically towards parents to support everyone who might be developing a program and administering activities to support adolescents who are affected by COVID-19. And especially those who, as we have been here in New York, have been living in a social distancing or quarantine or a stay-at-home context where they can't be outside engaging with other adolescents in person. Next slide. Great. So I do want to emphasize that the original adolescent kit has always been intended for adaptation. That's not new. And if you look at those country office examples, and again, I'm sure some of you are actually involved in some of these country office work and have been leaders in this, you know that the adolescent kit is always adapted, right? It's not a program in a box. There's no such thing as a cookie cutter approach that we could create from the headquarters level and then hope that might be effective in all the different countries that we work in. So the original adolescent kit is always intended for country offices and partners and adolescents themselves to be adapting and innovating using the we hope building blocks that the kit provides. But what we realized as we all faced this new crisis is that one of their core practices was not going to work effectively in the COVID crisis. That core idea that the adolescent kit would be used in a program where we bring adolescents together in an adolescent circle. We can't do that right now. We can't do it in New York. We can't do it in Azerbaijan. We can't do it in Colombia, any country where we're under stay-at-home or quarantine orders. And as we looked at the activities, we realized we needed to come up with some sort of activity that's feasible for adolescents who are at home with their families, probably in their households, and aren't able to come together physically in a group with other adolescents. And we also saw that that was a pretty heavy adaptation from the original activities. So even ourselves knowing the activities inside and out, it took us a lot of time to think about what's it going to look like to take one of these activities that's designed for a group of adolescents and give it to an individual adolescent in some way that's meaningful, feasible, most importantly fun, most importantly flexible. That's a heavy lift. So we thought we need to do this heavy lift at the country level so that we're giving a resource package that works at the global level for those who are actually on the front lines and facing this emergency. And something else we realized is that we would have to think about parents' roles in a new way. You know, in our normal use of an adolescent circle, the parents may be involved in the community planning of a program. They should be involved in understanding what the program is and its purpose, but they wouldn't necessarily be sitting in the adolescent circle with the adolescents, right? We actually would hope to be giving the adolescents some space to be together on their own. In this case, if adolescents are at home, their parents or their care providers who might not be their parents, right? Some adolescents are going to end up sheltering in place with adults who are looking after them, but who aren't their parents, who don't have that direct connection with them. So we needed to think about parents in a new way and think about what their role should be, and also how to guide them in not interfering or leading or guiding or pressuring adolescents, which parents may do just out of a sense of obligation and stress and care. So we needed to give parents some direct guidance. Next slide. And then a little bit more about how we adapted the adolescent kit. One thing we did is we just empathized with the reality of what adolescents and their families and their facilitators might all be facing. You know, here in New York, we have been one of the global epicenters of this crisis. So we were all living immediately affected by this crisis in certain ways. And we decided to treat that as an opportunity. You know, often I know, and we've all worked at the country level, and we may feel, oh, the people in New York and headquarters are so distant from this crisis. In this case, we have been ourselves affected by it. So we decided to sort of use that to think about what worked and what didn't and what we thought might work for adolescents. I'll even mention that Priya, as we developed these resources, she tested them out with her own family, her own kids, to see if her kids liked them and enjoyed them and seemed to get something out of them. So that was something new, I think, for all of us to really be, you know, working together in a crisis that is affecting us somehow. And we also had to recognize that this is a new kind of context. So the adolescent kit, the original version, we drew from years of innovation lessons experience at the country level. Having worked on the development of that kit, a lot of what we developed was not new. In fact, I would say at the headquarters level, we didn't really develop so much as we gathered and consolidated with and from adolescents and our colleagues and partners at the country level. So we all have a lot of experience working directly with adolescents in these other kinds of contexts. But this idea of working with individual remote learning, it's very new to all of us. So we had to recognize that we're just innovating, we're trying things that we haven't tested yet. And we also recognize that we had to move quickly. So that's our way of saying that a lot of what we're presenting to you now is new, is experimental. Next slide. So as we continued to think about this adaptation, we did sit with the adolescent kit, the original version, and just went through it, identified activities that we thought could feasibly either be used as they were in this by adolescents participating in activities individually in their own homes with their families around, or maybe off on their own. And then we also chose some that we thought, well, we could adapt this so that it might work for an adolescent working on their own. And again, we did work with the generosity and innovation and experimentation and collaboration of 5 country offices. Colombia in particular was kind of out in the lead and in innovating some new ideas and sharing them back with us as we got started. As well, Indonesia, Jordan, Tajikistan, and Lebanon have been collaborating, consulting, developing, and they're already out testing and using these resources through their programs. So that's been a tremendously valuable opportunity to learn. And a lot of what we'll talk about later in this webinar are the lessons that they've brought back and their recommendations, their success strategies in using these resources. And again, that does correspond with a practice throughout the development of the entire kit. We've always worked with country offices, and that's always been essential to making a package of resources that could work in other contexts. Next slide, please. So quickly, just to explain what's the difference between the original version and what is the new version. If you're looking at the left column, in the original version of the kit, adolescents are connecting and collaborating together physically in person in circles. In the new version of the kit that we'll present, adolescents are following instructions individually. So they're in their homes, they're not physically together, and they're getting some instructions for guidance in various forms, and we'll talk about what those can be in a moment. In the original kit, the activities are mainly led by trained facilitators who are using an adolescent-centered approach to facilitation, and the parents are not physically present. They're supporting the program in other ways, but they're not there in the adolescent circle. In the new version, adolescents are sort of leading the activity themselves. They've got some light touch guidance from facilitators who are sharing guidance with them, and then their parents may be participating with them, maybe kind of co-facilitating, or their parents may be stepping aside and protecting some space for the adolescents to work independently. And that depends on the adolescent's preference. What do they want? What will they get more out of? And the adolescent kit, the original form, is really meant to support the development of a comprehensive set of skills, support adolescents in building connections with each other, and lead to them taking action together in groups. So when we think about what adolescents can realistically do when they're working individually at home, we have to kind of scale back a little bit in this, at least in the short term. These activities are meant to give adolescents a chance for fun and a break from stress. And I would always highlight that first. That is the #1 goal of these activities. These activities should be fun for adolescents, and they should give them a break from stress. And then with that, they should also get a chance to develop some skills and some practices and habits for coping with stress, and also some opportunities to cope with the feelings of isolation, hopefully connect with adolescents who may be in other households, if that's possible through communication channels, but also strengthen their relationships with their immediate family members that they're isolated with at home. And for those of us who have been isolated at home, we know that these conditions can put a lot of stress on our family relationships. That is just a reality of staying at home, is that those relationships are under a lot of stress. So we wanted to think about how to reduce that stress. Next slide. So a little bit more comparison. We have in the original adolescent kit, we have 50 activity guides for adolescent circles. That's a lot. That's because we know that facilitators may be struggling to think of what activities to do with adolescents. I come from a background of teaching. I was a high school teacher for 10 years. And one of the biggest challenges that teachers and facilitators face is, what am I going to do with the kids every day? So we gave as many activity guides as possible to help facilitators and teachers and anyone else using the kit to answer that question. So 50 activity guides, 20 energizers. I'm sure we all know what energizers are, those kind of short fun activities, and then 20 inspiration cards, which are also sort of short ideas for activities that adolescents can do together. And in the adapted resource package, we chose and adapted 12 specific activity guides for adolescents working at home. We also chose 10 energizers that we thought could work well, and 14 inspiration cards that we thought could work well for adolescents who are, again, doing activities at home, trying to have some fun, trying to take a break from stress, trying to learn some healthy skills. And then in the original kit, there's a facilitator's guide to help to organize and plan sequences of activities for adolescents. In the adapted resource package, there's a quick guide for facilitators to lead activities. And then there are individual guides for facilitators that correspond with individual activities. In the original kit, there is a comprehensive program coordinator's guide. In the new adapted package, there is a guidance note. The cover note gives guidance for, again, we use this term program coordinator, and again, I'm imagining that is a descriptive term for most of you who are on this call, people who are program specialists, officers, managers, program designers, etc., who have some role in designing and overseeing a program. And then in the original adolescent kit, as I mentioned, we saw parents and caregivers, of course, as community members, as caregivers for adolescents, they should be involved in planning and supporting a program for adolescents and understanding its purpose and sharing their thoughts about what its goals should be, but they aren't necessarily directly involved in the implementation of the activities. But in this case, because adolescents are at home with their parents, we saw that we needed to give guidance to parents and caregivers to support adolescents. I apologize for not finishing that sentence, but it should say a quick guide for parents and caregivers to support adolescents as they participate in activities at home. Next slide. Okay, and in the adapted resource package, again, now I'm just kind of focusing in a little bit more on exactly what's in it. There are 12 activity guides for adolescents. There are 10 energizer cards, and those are, again, just kind of fun, active activities that adolescents can work on independently. I think that should say 14 inspiration cards, not 24, but there are 14 inspiration cards, which are short cards that give another idea for activities adolescents can work on at home.
There are 24, Juliet.
There are 24. Well, that's wonderful. That's better than 14. Thank you, Christine. And there's this guide there are guides for facilitators and guides for parents. Next slide. Okay. So I want to do something that's a little bit different from our normal way of going through and presenting a new package of resources. What I want to do now is telescope in a little bit. I want to give all of you who are on the call a picture of what we mean by an activity that adolescents could work on at home, and what it would look like for an adolescent to be working on an activity kind of independently with and without their parents, that without a facilitator physically present. So I'm giving you these two pictures of two adolescents, and on the right we're making up the identities and we're making up the countries, but on the right we have Andres, and Andres is an adolescent in Colombia. And on the left we have Amina, and Amina is a Syrian refugee living in Turkey. So we're going to think about these two as our case studies and just think about what it's like to be Andres and what it's like to be Amina. As I'm doing this, you might start literally picturing an adolescent in your own context and thinking about where they might be, where they will be as they work on activities, which activities in this resource package might work for them, and what kinds of communication channels and facilitation processes might actually be feasible for them. So let's start with Andres. Next slide. So here's Andres. By the way, we'll explain the cake later, but let's imagine that Andres so we're right in the middle of a program now. We're imagining that Andres is going to be in the middle of one of these programs that you at the country level have already planned and developed for him. And Andres has a mobile phone, which not every adolescent does. So Andres is going to be getting activity guides from his facilitator on his mobile phone. And by the way, Andres and his family know, they've been involved in hearing about this program. They know it's coming, they're expecting, they've signed up to participate. And there's Andres's mobile phone on the right. And we're going to look at how he might participate in an activity called I Am, I Have, I Can. Next slide. So here's Andres' phone, and the first thing that he sees at the top of his activity guide, which by the way would be in Spanish, and we'll talk about the translations in a moment, is the first thing he would see is the title of this activity called I Am, I Have, I Can, and he'll learn about what the purpose of the activity is, because he needs to know why he's doing this and what's the goal. And what he's learning is that he's going to understand what are some of the resources and strengths that he already has, and how he's going to explore his own identity and do some drawing and some creative artwork. Next slide. So then the activity guide tells him what he's going to need. All he needs is a place where he can sit comfortably and draw, and some kind of table or a hard surface that he can draw against. That's all he needs in terms of a place in his home where he'll do this activity. And the only materials he needs are a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. I'll take a quick note here. We'll talk more about the supplies, but all of these activities are designed to use materials that are no more complicated than a pen or pencil and a few pieces of paper. That is as complicated as the materials get for any of these activities. And some of them require no materials whatsoever. So now after it tells him where to start, he's going to start by sitting somewhere where he's comfortable and he has a clean flat surface to put the paper on. And then it tells him how to start working on his drawing step by step. So you see that number 1, he's going to turn his paper to the landscape direction. He's going to start drawing a large circle. Can you do the next slide, please? Okay, and he's scrolling down on his phone, and here's the guidance. And all of this guidance sort of walks him through how is he going to draw his drawing. And all of this is meant to be very flexible. There's not a right or wrong way to do a drawing. It's just sort of giving him an idea of what he might do. Next slide. And after he finishes drawing, we give him some ideas. If he had fun and he wants to keep working on this, here are some ideas for how he could keep working on the drawing. And then down here under share, depending on how he's getting the instructions for these activities, he could, if he's doing this on a mobile phone, he could take a picture of his drawing and share it with the group. He might also, whether he's online or offline, keep his drawing at home, put it up somewhere where the whole family can look at it, invite other people in his family to look at it and tell them about what he drew and what he shared. Next slide. And okay, so we just saw Andres's version of what the activities guide is going to look like, but as I mentioned, there's a facilitator's guide and a parent's guide. So this facilitator guide is telling whoever's sending out these images sort of a few steps that they should take before they send them, while sending them, after sending them, because in this scenario where Andres and all of his friends and other adolescents in his community are getting these messages by mobile phone, we hope they're also kind of exchanging some more ideas and exchanging some images and doing some follow-up, and the facilitator might be asking them, oh, what did you learn that you didn't already know, or what was fun about this activity, or again, please share a copy or a photo so that we can all see your drawing. So this gives the facilitator some ideas of how to manage that part of their role. And then on the other side, we also might be sending out some messages directly to parents and caregivers for what they should be doing. And a big message that we're going to give parents and caregivers is that some of what they may be doing is actually just stepping back and creating space for the adolescent to participate in activities themselves. We know that out of their own sense of stress and care for kids, parents might want to get very actively involved and say, make sure you do the drawing, make sure you turn it in on time. But that's not going to add to adolescents' fun or creativity. So we want to give parents some guidance for saying, you know, do you want me to do this activity with you? Maybe that'll make it more fun. Do you want me to help you figure out the directions? Maybe that'll make it more enjoyable. Or do you want me to just go in the other room and make sure nobody bothers you while you take a little break from and get a little time to yourself and do this activity? I know at least one parent that tried this out said that they asked their adolescent, do you want me to do this with you? And the adolescent said, no, I want to go work on it on my own. And that went fine. So, so that's part of our guidance for parents. Next slide. Great. And this is, of course, this is not Andres. This is a real girl named Clara Beth. And Clara Beth is sharing her drawing. She's in Colombia and has tried this out. And let me quickly, I think I've lost my quotes, but Clara Beth said that she found this to be, shared some feedback with the Columbia Country Office saying that she found this to be a helpful and interesting activity. And it did help her to recognize her sense of strengths. And she saw it as a kind of, this message of I am, I have, I can was even sort of a slogan or a concept that could be a principle for how to get through the COVID crisis together and how communities can work together to support each other. So she liked the activity. Next slide. So let's look at a different scenario, because not every adolescent, and especially not all adolescents that are the hardest to reach and most marginalized, may have a mobile phone. And so another approach, which I believe what has been used in Colombia, is literally just to give physical cards for adolescents' activities to adolescents somewhere where their families might be picking up other kinds of essential items, either food distribution site or NFI distribution sites. So let's just imagine that this is Amina, and Amina is a Syrian refugee, and Amina does not have a mobile phone, but she and her family are with UNICEF and NGO support collecting either food or NFI at a site. So here we have, she's going to get these cards that give her the activity guidance. And by the way, again, these would, if she's Syrian, they would be provided for her in Arabic. Next slide. Great, so this one is called Gathering Stories. And the purpose of this, once again, same format. It starts by telling Amina what the purpose of the activity is. And this is, we're telling her, her job is she's going to go find a story in her household. And she's going to go on, we're going to call it like a treasure hunt, where she's going on this hunt for a story in her own household. Next slide. Once again, we start by telling her what she needs. Oh, I'm sorry, can you go back to the last slide? Just down at the bottom, I don't know if you can see, but what does she need in this case? It's mostly the same thing. She's going to need a quiet place at some point where she can write down some notes. She's going to need some paper and a pencil just to be writing some notes. And she's also going to need in this case, she's going to need somebody in her household who's willing to work with her on a creative activity. So it could be anybody. Next slide. So the step-by-step guides her through the idea that she's going to find somebody in her household, probably an older person who has an interesting story to tell. And she's going to go and sort of capture the story. She's going to interview the person in her family, in her household. She's going to make a note of the story. And she's going to write it down in a creative way. And all of these activities are meant to be very flexible, right? There's not a right or wrong. There's not a specific format that they have to take. And the idea is to encourage the adolescents with their families to come up with their own creative way that they might capture or tell a story, or do any other kind of creative work, drawing, photo, etc. Next slide. Thank you. These are the steps. One of the steps, by the way, is that we suggested that that Amina might actually write an invitation. So if she wants her grandmother to tell her a story, she might write her grandmother a little invitation and say, "Dear Grandma, I would like to hear the story of the time that you told me about on the farm back home." And so then that's a way of kind of supporting them in developing and practicing these kind of communication and collaboration skills, where you think about how you're going to reach out to somebody and how you're going to tell them your story is valuable to me and I want to hear it. Next slide. Great. And then once again, it gives some options. Once Amina has developed her story, it gives some options for what she could do with it to make it more creative, as well as different options for how she might share her story with others in her family, with others beyond her family, using the communication channels that are available right now during the COVID or other kind of social distancing crisis, and maybe after, when there's an opportunity for people to be together in person. Next slide. And so once again, we heard some feedback from an adolescent in Colombia who actually has done this activity and said, "I love this activity," in which we talk to our grandparents. Their stories are really interesting, and I like the activity because I was able to know more about my grandmother. Her experiences are so special, and that's from a 19-year-old. And on the right, the actual product that he created of his story. So you can see he wrote down the story with some emojis in it to tell the story in his own style, creative style, and using, I guess, using a phone or word processor, as well as capturing some photos that went together with the story. So this sort of corresponds with the idea that adolescents can create the activities and can create some kind of artistic or expressive work through these activities, and then they do it their own way. So he did it through this photo and other images, but somebody might tell it as an oral story or make an audio recording. There's not one right or wrong way that adolescents create these stories. Also, by the way, we blurred this one out a little bit to respect his privacy, because we don't have Christian-specific permission to be sharing this with you globally. Next slide. Okay, so we telescoped in for a minute. I wanted you to understand what we meant by what are these activities? What would it look like for an adolescent to be working on an activity at home? What do we mean by creative and expressive and fun and taking a break and artistic activities? So now that we've telescoped in a little bit, we're going to telescope back out. I just want to show you more of what's in this adapted package for COVID-19. Next slide. First, just so you know, this is where you can find the adapted resource package. It's right there. Any of you can access it right now at that website, corecommitments.unicef.org/ADAP. So that's there for you. And if you do, take a look at that cover page that you can see, the one that says Adolescent Kit for Expression and Innovation Adapted Resource Kit in orange at the top. Please, if you do look, take a minute to read that. That'll give you some helpful information. Next slide. Okay, and the cover guidance gives you more information about what's in the package. So one, I wanted to point out this, if you see the list of activities, we mentioned that there are 12 activities. If you mention so you can see that there are 12 activities, and I wanted to mention the color coding now. You'll see that there are 7, what is it, 6 or 7? I should know. 7 activities that are in pink. That indicates sort of more simple activities in this phase that I mentioned before called knowing ourselves. The green activities are a bit more advanced and involve more interaction and connection, and those are activities that correspond with the connecting phase. And then we do have one activity that corresponds with this taking action phase. Taking action is, of course, a bit complicated in the COVID crisis, right? Because adolescents can always take a role in any kind of crisis, in any kind of context, can always be contributing, but we also know that they have to stay at home and they can't be meeting and going out of their houses and experimenting in the same ways as in other contexts. So there's one taking action activity, and that has to do with facilitating either a family or community dialogue. This package gives you an overview of the competencies that are addressed by these activities, which are the same as the competencies addressed by the Adolescent Kit original version. And there's a few tips in here if you're planning a program for how to use this contextualized package. Next. Great. There's also a guide for facilitators. So this is helping facilitators to think about their role in planning and preparing to lead activities with adolescents remotely, which is new to most of us, right? I mean, this is, I can speak from my own experience. I teach college and started the semester in teaching in person and suddenly had to go to remote instruction. So we're all adapting and learning what it's going to be like to facilitate and lead activities remotely. And this gives some guidance for facilitators who may be leading activities remotely through different channels. Next slide. As you've heard me mention, there is a lot of guidance for parents and caregivers. So, and one of them is this cover and introductory guide that we would hope that you may find useful to share directly with parents and caregivers to help them understand what's the purpose of these activities and also what is their sort of helpful role in what the activity in supporting adolescents, either by working with them and or by stepping back and giving adolescents space to work on activities even though they're isolated in their home. Next step, next slide. Okay, and here's a little bit more of what the individual activities guides can look like. I also just wanted you to observe that these are designed for the different communication channels that you might be using in your countries. And if you look at the PDFs that are available on the Core Commitments website, and look at some of the individual activities guides, which I hope you will do, you'll see what I mean. So if you just look at the silence and sounds one on the left, you see that it's a very long PDF, and that's for that sort of mobile app that I showed you before, where somebody might be sort of scrolling through the mobile app and they just need that long version altogether. And then at the same time, all of them also have the version that you can just print up as a two-sided card, and then you may find that you're adapting them in other ways. I also want to repeat what I mentioned before. These ones with the pink graphic, those correspond with the knowing ourselves cycle, knowing ourselves phase, where these are more simple activities for adolescents kind of getting started and thinking about their identity and their strengths. The green activities correspond with the connecting phase, where we're encouraging adolescents to interact and connect more, in this case, especially with the people in their own households. And then the orange corresponds with the take action phase. And I think that there's also a hope that we may sort of expand beyond these 12 activities, and these different color codes may correspond with other activities that we develop and or that you develop at the country office level and share back with us. Next slide. There are also, as I mentioned before, energizer cards. So in addition to those 12 activities, there are also these 10 energizers from the original Adolescent Kit that we saw. We looked at them and said, you could do this individually at home. This is something you could still do at home, pretty much as it was originally written for the Adolescent Kit. And then there's also this idea of inspiration cards, which are very simple instructions for adolescents to carry on an activity and where they might be figuring out what the steps are. We just give them the idea and then let them try to run with it. So one of them is this idea of a vertical garden. Maybe you can build a garden out of water bottles or other canisters and attach it to a wall inside or outside your house. And so these are just sort of simple experimental activities for adolescents. Next slide. Great. I know I'm running a little bit behind, Priya and Christine. If you want to jump in at any point, please do. But I'm going to just proceed with the as we are for now. So I did want to share with you some of the key planning and implementation steps that we recommend for this. Next slide. Great. So I just want to emphasize that if you're considering using this package, the first step I would strongly encourage is just go through the resources. I think you can get a lot by just try to browse all of them. even if you don't have time to read them all in depth. They're designed with, we designed these with the understanding that anyone working on programs in emergency response right now is busy and overwhelmed. So we hope that we've designed them in a way that is easy to browse and that you can get a lot of information and ideas and think quickly about how you might adapt them in your context. Next slide. As a first step, by the way, these key planning and implementation steps, I'm presenting them to you in what I think is a logical order, but we are all always doing this kind of preparation and implementation at the same time. So we recognize that you're going to be kind of doing these, and some of them are probably going to go without saying. These steps, I'm not going to try to explain to you how to design and implement a program because you know that better than I do. I'm just going to emphasize a few things that we think are especially relevant for using this particular package in the context of the way you already implement and plan programs. So one is just to appraise adolescent situation and priorities. We would encourage you to, of course, just build on what you already know from your situation analysis and ask a few things directly of adolescents about how they're being affected by this crisis right now. Among other things, we want to know how the crisis is affecting them. We want to know what they want and what they would find fun at this moment, interesting, enjoyable, helpful. And you may want to find out more about what communication channels are available to adolescents, because as we mentioned before, in some situations, a lot of them may have mobile phones. In some situations, none of them may have mobile phones. Maybe they have a radio, maybe they don't. So knowing what adolescents have access to is going to be key in knowing how you're going to reach them with activity guidance. I do want to emphasize, we always hope that we're focusing on reaching those who are the most vulnerable and hardest to reach, which by the way can present the greatest challenges for communication channels, right? So here in New York, for example, we learned that 300,000 students in New York City do not have reliable access to devices for the remote instruction that we're doing. And that's in New York City. So around the world, we need to think about what's the best communication channel and how are we going to reach those who are hardest to reach. But this on the right, this is an example of how UNICEF Colombia went about this, sort of adding and augmenting their understanding of adolescence during the COVID crisis. Next slide. Of course, are in partnerships, those who are from NGOs, those are from UNICEF, we should always be planning and collaborating together. So that is one of the steps. We hope that you would be bringing these resources together and thinking together about how you might use them through a new program or through an existing program. We hear over and over from our colleagues, and I think most of us have experienced ourselves, youth volunteers and youth in general can make amazing facilitators. So if you have that opportunity to work with youth facilitators, if you have been working with youth facilitators, we would encourage you to continue to do so. You may need some training and planning and orientation for how to implement these particular activities using the guidance we've given. Although I would emphasize that these are not complex activities to facilitate. If anything, they may be in some ways simpler to facilitate than in-person activities. So don't be daunted that this is going to be too complicated. Hopefully it will be simple and feasible for all kinds of facilitators in your context. And this is, by the way, UNICEF Jordan has been working with their youth facilitators to implement this program. Next slide. Also, a lot of our country office colleagues that have been working on this, Jordan, Indonesia, Tajikistan, Lebanon, and Colombia, have been integrating this program with their ongoing work, whether that's their life skills work for adolescents, whether that's their civic or youth engagement programs, whether that's mental health and psychosocial support, or any combination of all of those. So these activities should fit well with the objectives and practices of those ongoing programs. Again, they're meant to sort of give adolescents a chance, give us a way to continue to engage with adolescents, to continue to reach them, give a chance for adolescents to continue to practice the kinds of life skills and coping skills and creativity that they probably were already practicing through your programs while they're in this situation, so that we don't just kind of leave them alone during this time. We're keeping connected with them, and then we hope that soon we'll be going back to regular programming. And again, always focusing on the most marginalized and hardest to reach adolescents. Next slide. please choose from the activities in this package that you think could work in your context. And I think the best way to do this is really to sit with the activities. They're all simple, easy, quick to read, but think about, you know, if you put it all together, we're actually giving you 46 different activities in this package, and that's a lot. So you probably won't have time to do all 46 of these activities. That might not even be beneficial. Actually, we hope you won't have time to do all of them. We hope that we'll all be back to more normalcy before you would reach 46. But choose the activities that you think would work in your context, that would be relevant to what you know that adolescents want, to the kinds of activities they enjoy, to how long your program might last. We did present the 12 activities in what should be a pretty logical sequence. So if you just wanted to use those 12, hopefully they would work in the order that we presented them. But again, you should choose, and you should adapt as you see fit. And also, please notice that look how different this activity guide that UNICEF Colombia developed is. We actually learned a lot and developed from them, but they put together their own design, they put together their own translation. So there's no reason that you have to use the activities as we've designed them. You should really take them up and make them yours. Next. Okay, and here's something that we've referred to a few times, but I think is worth digging into a little bit, is that there may be different ways that you're communicating with adolescents in their households. And these are the 3 general categories that we've thought of, but you may think of others that work in your context. So first, you may be reaching adolescents with mobile phones, right? You might be working with them, as we've already seen, that they're getting this sort of activity guide from a facilitator on their mobile phone, and those activity guides are designed so that you have that kind of scrollable screen if that's what you want. We also talked about the possibility down in the right-hand corner that you might be handing out activity cards or distributing activity cards to adolescents when they pick up their food or NFI distribution or something else. So that may be how you're organizing this. Another possibility, UNICEF Tajikistan is able to access the national TV channel. So they're going to do a TV presentation, and that's a feasible way to reach a lot of adolescents in that context. So that's a kind of exciting opportunity. And something else we know works well in many countries that is very effective, and also, by the way, may be effective if you're reaching adolescents and families who in low literacy contexts, is radio. You could be reading the instructions and the guidance over the radio and hoping adolescents and their parents are tuning in. So think about the communication channels that will work best for you. We're assuming that you're going to adapt this to whatever will be most relevant, feasible, accessible in your context. Next slide. I mentioned before supplies. These activities mostly involve adolescents using a pen or pencil and a few pieces of paper, and that's it. So if you think adolescents have those resources at home, then you probably don't need to worry about distributing supplies. If you think the adolescents that you want to be working with do not have those resources at home, you may want to take that into consideration and consider how you might distribute some paper or pencils. So most practically, what I'm thinking in this regard is, if you're in one of the contexts where you might be distributing cards, activity cards, along with food and NFI distribution, that might be a context where adolescents would also benefit from getting a pen or pencil and some pieces of paper so that they can also do the activities. But again, beyond that, none of these activities require any more complex materials. Next slide.
Juliet, I just want to notify you of the time, so we have time left for Q&A.
Yes. What would you like? How would you like for me to proceed? Because I do want to leave time for Q&A. We could just skip ahead to the questions that I prepared. We could skip ahead to questions.
Please proceed, but we can, just to let everyone know, we'll share these slides, of course, so you can go through them again, but maybe we skip through them a little faster.
Okay.
5 more minutes, maybe?
Yep, great. Okay, so this one probably does go without saying, so it's I will skip through it quickly, but just to say that, as you know, of course, if you're going to do set of activities for adolescents in their home, you need to announce and inform the community that you're working with that this program is available and encourage their participation. Again, really thinking about the fact that those who are hardest to reach and most in need of support from programs may be the ones that are hardest to reach with this announcement and information. So thinking creatively about how to reach them. Next slide. And also now we're kind of thinking about implementation, but try to give find ways to gather and share what adolescents create through this program. It's rewarding for them. It builds their opportunities for connection. And by the way, so again, we've got a nice example from Colombia, where in this case, the boy and his parents did decide to do the activity together. So they all created their drawings of who they are and their I am, I can drawings. And also you may think about ways that you might give adolescents a chance to share their works in person or through kind of a celebration or an exhibit, whether that's online or whether that is in person when there's an opportunity for adolescents and families to come together physically again. We also truly hope that you're going to gather adolescent suggestions for what to do next, because that may inform what they do as you move on in the next program. So for example, adolescents, by the time they've done some of these activities, may have their own ideas for what they want to do next, what kind of activities, how they want to take action. Next slide. For monitoring and evaluation, generally speaking, our country offices who've been using any version of the Adolescent Kit work with their M&E teams to develop their own tools and processes for monitoring and evaluating the programs as they use the kit resources. So we're imagining that will also be the case as you use this adapted package for COVID-19. Just to mention that the program coordinator's guide of the original Adolescent Kit also includes some resources for monitoring and evaluation. It's not a comprehensive M&E package, but it is some tools that you may find useful to adapt. Also, UNICEF Indonesia has been innovating some new approaches to gathering adolescents' feedback on their experiences, consulting directly with them through a survey. And soon, ADAP was going to be working with the education team to think about how to assess adolescents' development of skills, which is one of the most complex things to develop on, or to assess on the impact level, is when are adolescents actually learning and developing new skills. But always, we hope that if you're doing M&E, you're consulting adolescents directly about their feedback and experiences. So we're learning from them what's working for them and what recommendations they have for us for how to make things better. Next slide. Okay. Also, please think about how you may be preparing to transition into the COVID-19, after the COVID-19 situation that you may be facing. We hope you might look at the Adolescent Kit, the original version, if you haven't already done so. And we do also want to emphasize that we hope that you're going to think about bringing adolescents together in groups as soon as it's safe to do so. It's not safe in New York right now for us to bring adolescents in groups, so we can't do that. But we do have that as a long-term goal. It's always best for adolescents' well-being if they are together physically in groups, learning, talking, etc. We are using screens in New York because it's our best and only way of working together. But we know that too much screen time and too much socializing via screens is not necessarily healthy for adolescents. It's certainly not as good as adolescents being together with each other and together out in the world. So we hope that you will think about that as a goal as soon as it's possible. And we don't want to think about this kit as a way that we are sort of reaching those who are hard to reach for other reasons instead of trying to actually get to them. We're only really emphasizing using this kit if it's unsafe for adolescents to be together in groups, but not as a solution to some of the other challenges that we may face with how hard it can be to reach the most remote ones. Next slide. Above all, please share any experiences that you have with us. We love learning from you, and as you can see, everything that we're sharing with you is something that we've learned from and sometimes with our colleagues and the adolescents that they work with in the country offices. We also love an opportunity to share the achievements and accomplishments that you make at the country level with each other and with others around the world. And we can only do that if you communicate directly with us. And if you come up with great innovative practices, we would love to know so that we can highlight your work, and also so that we hope kind of integrate what you share with us and create into the package as it continues to be sort of a living and evolving package of resources, both the original kit and this new package for COVID. Next slide. Okay, Christine, do you want me to go to these? And Priya, do you want me to go to these frequently asked questions, or shall we go to
Yes,
those
please.
that?
Yes.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so first of all, question we've already gotten, is the kit available in other languages? The original adolescent kit is currently available in English and Arabic. The whole kit is available in English and Arabic. We're soon going to have both French and Spanish translations underway. It has been translated into multiple other languages, Tajik, Bahasa Indonesia, Burmese, and also the package includes InDesign files that are there for you if you want to translate at the country level and then kind of republish things using the formatting, and which the formatting is meant to make the whole package more usable and engaging and user-friendly and those things. So let us know if you want support with understanding how to do the translation, but it's very translatable. The adapted resource package has also been translated already into other languages, Bahasa Indonesia, Tajik, and many files are available in Spanish. As well, the InDesign files are available for country level translation. Please keep in mind that we had to work super quickly on the adapted package. So the original adolescent kit we've been working on for years. This new adapted package for weeks, it's maybe barely weeks. So we're still catching up on making it more on translations and other adaptations. Next slide. We get this question often, should we adapt and contextualize the activities and other materials to use them? Yes, by all means. Of course, translation may be redesigned if you want to, although we hope you don't have to take the time to redesign them if you don't have time to do that. But also reading through the activities themselves, choosing the ones that you think will work in your context, and you're really thinking about the adolescents as you always do. Like what's their situation? What do we know about what they want? What's feasible for them? And also you may find that you want to put in some cultural or other contextual adaptations. So for example, in that gathering stories activity that I mentioned before, we suggested this idea that you might write a handwritten invitation to your grandmother to say, can I interview you to hear your story about the farm? But that's like, you know, that may not be a relevant way that people invite somebody, you know, in your context. So you might change that part of the guidance to say, here's how you would do it here in whatever country you're working in. So there's lots of ways that you may want to be adapting these activities, and of course you should contextualize them for adolescents in your context. Next slide. Are these activities accessible for adolescents with disabilities? So first, I'll mention that when we developed the adolescent kit, we did it in consultation with the disability section, with the privilege of working with them and learning from them. And the entire kit is designed not just for individual activities to be adaptable, but to think about what it means to reach and include adolescents with all different kinds of disabilities. So there are lots of ways that the original package is designed with specific guidance to make sure that we reach and include adolescents with disabilities to the maximum extent possible, and that all of the activities in the kit include some recommendations for how to adapt them and make them accessible for adolescents with different kinds of disabilities. And as well, they include other recommendations for adaptation. So the same is true for the COVID-19 package, but we would emphasize that we still think that we need to learn with you and with adolescents with disabilities and those without about how and whether these activities are available and accessible. Something I mentioned before is that when you're consulting adolescents about how they're affected by the COVID-19 crisis and about what channels of communication they use, you may, for example, want to find out if those with disabilities are using apps or anything else with assistive technologies. So if that's the case, you may be able to build that in, right? So an adolescent who's visually impaired, if they're using um, uh, uh, assistive technologies, they may be able to hear that guidance that's on their app and on their phone instead of reading it, which wouldn't be accessible to them. So think about the technologies that you can use, and as well, read the activities and think about how you can adapt them to make them work for adolescents with different categories of disability. Next slide. Are these activities appropriate for adolescents of different ages? They are designed for adolescents across the age of 10 to 19. And so far, those in Colombia have shared with us across that age range, have shared some positive feedback to say, yes, these are fun and engaging and relevant and appropriately challenging and rewarding across that different age range. In general, those knowing ourselves activity with the pink graphics are a little simpler. So those may be more relevant for younger adolescents, those 10 to 14. In general, the green and orange ones may be a little more challenging, so those may be more relevant for the older adolescents. But my experience, and I imagine many of you would agree with me, adolescents around the world are really diverse. I mean, and it's very hard for me to generalize what a 19-year-old will always like versus what a 10-year-old will always like, or anything in between. So, you know, and I find sometimes older adolescents do like the fun, simple games, and so do parents, and so do adults. And sometimes the younger adolescents are ready for more challenging and sophisticated activities. So it's hard to generalize. I encourage you always to yourself read, consider, think, and be willing to experiment. You know, adolescents can, again, they may surprise us what they do and don't find interesting, fun, relevant, and challenging. Next slide. Are there linkages between the Adolescent Kit Adapted Resource Package and the original kit and innovation programs? Yes. And so as well, pardon the typo there, but the Adolescent Kit has been used and harmonized with the innovation programs, especially Upshift, but also education and child protection. So generally we see this Adolescent Kit resource is used through and with different programs in different sectors. UNICEF Tajikistan has been doing a lot of work with harmonizing the Adolescent Kit with their innovation programs. And this adapted package for COVID-19 is meant to especially support adolescents in keeping those creative and innovative skills relevant and flexible even though they're isolated in their home. So we hope that's creating a foundation for them to continue to remain involved in innovation and other kinds of programs. Next slide. Can the Adolescent Kit and Adapted Resource Package be used to promote community social cohesion and peace building? We've also gotten the question, for example, can it be used to promote anti-racism or anti-discrimination or anti-xenophobia kinds of education programs? And the answer is, once again, yes. The competencies that the kit promotes are relevant for all of these kinds of programs: empathy, respect, collaboration, cooperation, self-esteem. All of these are foundational for social cohesion, for peace building, for anti-discrimination, for anti-racism. So yes, absolutely, the kit can contribute. At the same time, if you have a specific goal with respect to one of those programs, we would recommend that you be developing and adapting and integrating resources for your program that address those specific goals. So if you specifically want adolescents to be learning about racism, developing resources that support their knowledge and attitudes that are relevant to whatever the issues around, whether it's racism or xenophobia in your context, are important. So make sure that you're developing complementary resources at the community level. Similarly, if you're working on a peace building program, thinking about what are the objectives for peace building that you're trying to achieve and integrating relevant resources and practices towards those objectives. Next slide. We've received some questions about how these activities can be used with adolescents and parents with low literacy. One step we recommend is that you use your own knowledge of these contexts. Again, look at the activities, look at the practices, think about what kinds of activities could work or might be modified to work with low literacy adolescents and families. we think it's likely that the communication channel that you use to reach adolescents and families will be a part of solving that problem. So for example, radio might be a really good way to get activity guides if you're working with adolescents or with parents who don't have strong literacy skills. Then they don't have to read the guidance, they can hear the guidance. You may have other creative ways to reach low literacy adolescents and families in your context. And we also wanted to think about the fact that we don't want to create anxiety among parents that they're able to support or collaborate with adolescents. You may be wanting to think about ways that facilitators can be working more directly with adolescents, so that we're not working with the parents to as a sort of channel for the communication of the activities, that the facilitators can work more directly with the adolescents, whether that means communicating with them by radio or some other creative way that you have for facilitators to be sharing the guidance, so that parents can be listening together with the activity, together with the adolescents and understanding. Next slide. Okay, we are continuing to develop a frequently asked question for the sheet for the adapted resource package, so that'll be coming soon. But let us know if you have more questions, and we are documenting the ones you're sharing, as I'm using so much of your time right now. And again, please share your innovations, your lessons learned, and your achievements with us, so that we can continue to learn from you and understand what and gather your best practices and support you in ways that are relevant and helpful. And I see Maria Camila, who's been such an innovator. It's nice to see your comments and feedback. Thank you. I'm going to turn over to Priya now.
Thank you, Juliet. I will take over. Next slide, please. Next slide. So before we go into the Q&A, and because we have very little time left, I just want to quickly mention what we're going to be working on the kit this year. So many of you have noticed the wonderful illustration that Juliet used in her presentation, where the kit did look like it was part of an app. Unfortunately, we do not have an app for this kit right now. That would be wonderful if some of you think about developing that for your context, your country. So far, we're exploring how to digitize the original and the adapted kit. And in the digitization process, I think that we will explore making it available to be used in an app in your own settings. We might also explore a global app that is yet to be seen. We're also exploring how to integrate it into Internet of Good Things that has sort of an app layout and look and feel. So we will see what happens throughout the year and definitely keep all of you posted on that. As Juliet mentioned, we're trying to explore how to do skills assessment suggestions so that you can take these suggestions for assessing adolescent skills at a baseline, midline, endline. Of course, this will be a global suggestion that you will need to take and contextualize to fit the adolescents in your countries. Then furthermore, we're really looking into building more strategic partnerships so that we can increase the opportunities for adolescents to connect with the kit and the adapted kit. And that could be through more partnerships with external partners. So if you know of anybody, please feel free to reach out to us here at the HQ team. We're always looking for more opportunities. As you can see, the webinars, we have now conducted 3 webinars, 2 launches, and 1 technical tutorial. We really want to do this technical tutorial regionally as well. So in Arabic, in Spanish, in French, but we need partners to do this with. We do not have the language abilities at HQ. So it's something we're exploring. We're already looking into LACRO and MENA region to do this. So get in touch with us if you have the capacity to assist with this as well. We will also make this widely accessible to everybody in those regions once we know more. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A, and I want to turn over the first question to my colleague Priya. Priya, do you want to take on some of the questions that you have identified?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Christine. And I'll make it very quick, colleagues. Some of you had posted questions about how do we link up the adolescent kit or the adapted in its original form or the adapted resource package with M&E tools, with feedback questionnaires and feedback mechanisms. And in this, the one evaluation or assessment report we do have is from UNICEF Indonesia. It was external as part of a broader innovation assessment that was done by Deloitte. But we do not have any formal evaluations of the adolescent kit because, as Juliet said, it has only been in use in the last 2-3 years. So we are hoping that in the future we will have our many country offices opting for formal evaluations and formal reviews. However, many of our country offices have been already linking the work of the kit with their ongoing education and child protection programs. Please talk to your M&E colleagues, for UNICEF colleagues who are joining, and for other partners who are joined in as well. Please reach out to UNICEF because there is already an M&E system in place, and sometimes we end up integrating the work of the kit within those M&E systems. And as for the adapted resource package, there is talk among country offices. As you know, we're just rolling this out. There's talk among country offices to build in feedback mechanisms so that we'll be able to receive feedback from adolescents on how it's going, what they feel about the activities in terms of what they've exactly learned and how the learning has processed. Again, I think this is a broader question with M&E teams, with the education and child protection colleagues in your countries to have a dialogue with. As we've been saying, please try to integrate it within ongoing initiatives that you already have on life skills, on child protection, on mental health, etc. And that will give you some leads. Then the next question was about sequencing of the kit. And I won't go into too much detail, how to go about sequencing all of the activities to navigate, especially with local partners. The kit, as you know, goes through the 4 phases: knowing ourselves, connecting to others, taking action, etc., as Juliet had presented. So of course there is a sequence that can be followed from those phases, and activities that can be continued from simple to more complex ones. However, it's also loosely designed so that the countries can take on activities from the kit and put in other life skills and other packages that they have ongoing in their country. So we've really tried to keep it flexible, but at the same time, we have provided some guidance. And similarly with the adapted resource package that you'll see, the different activities that are there, it's really meant for countries to take on to see which are the most relevant, important, context specific that you would like to use. But of course, we have identified them with the current phases as well. And lastly, I'll answer one question about the stationaries, etc. required. I think we've answered it already. You just really need a pen and paper for the adapted resource package activities to be conducted in the home, and of course all the other channels that you are using with your partners, be it Facebook or WhatsApp or radio or providing hard copies to adolescents. So all of this information is mentioned in the activity cards itself. When you download them, when you look at them, all of the instructions are quite easy and simple to follow. Over to Christine. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Priya. So thank you everyone for joining. If we can go to the last slide, Erica. Thank you. So this has been a wonderful webinar, and I really want to thank Juliet for this amazing presentation. It's a wealth of knowledge that we gain from you, and I just want to make it clear to everybody that we will answer all the questions that you have asked us in writing. We will send it to you at the end of this week. As Juliet already mentioned, we're developing a more formal frequently asked questions sheet, so that will also be disseminated, and then all of the questions that will not be part of that will still be answered in a more informal document. As you can see from the links that I've shared, we have an external access website to the kit, an adapted kit, and we have an internal UNICEF access. During this summer, in August, hopefully, everything, all the files that we have, InDesign, image files, PDFs, they will be accessible at adolescentkit.org. But our website updates are a little slow, so it will be there. Until then, you have these 3 links that you see in front of you. Those are your go-to resources. We encourage all of our UNICEF colleagues to access the full amount of files available to you in the SharePoint site. Please find the files there. Please share them with your implementing partners, because that's where the InDesign and the image files are. For example, when you share through WhatsApp, it's easier to share an image file than a PDF. So we've tried to make everything available. That is also the page and the library where the translated versions will be made available to everybody. So I'll share that again in my email correspondence, but really recommend you to use each other as a buddy system, where country offices, you can contact each other. We can help you facilitate the contact. So please just feel free to write the Adolescent Kit at unicef.org, and Priya and myself and Juliet with any questions you may have or any need for facilitation of contacts. We're always here for you and ready to help you. So with that, I want to close this webinar and say thank you everybody for joining. It has really been amazing to see. I think we were 260 audience at one point in this webinar, and that is just amazing to see.
300, sorry,
300. So thank you so much for giving us your time today. We will get back to you with more information. Have a
Thank you
great
so
day.
much. Thank you, everyone.